first half an hour or so to speak about the issue and the laws and the challenges. And after that, we'll start the discussions with all your thoughts, questions, comments. So human trafficking is an issue very close to my heart and has been a focus of my work for a few years now. I picked up interest in this issue in the very first few years of my law school, in fact, during my internship. And I was lucky to be presented with a lot of opportunities to work in this field with a lot of inspiring people through this journey. What really pains me is that it's still an issue which is rarely discussed. It's not really understood. Even though it's a very prevalent problem, it's all around us. It's happening within our immediate circles, but we don't see it happening. And it's not just a problem in India, it's a worldwide problem. There's hardly any country which does not face the problem of human trafficking. And also, let's not forget, this is an offense which is actually mentioned in our constitution in Article 23. So it's because it's something which has it has its roots in slavery. That's what it is. It's often called modern day slavery. And so what happens whenever I mention human trafficking to people, and be it lawyers or non-lawyers, I realize that people have a very limited understanding. Some people see it only as sex trafficking. Some people see it only as labor trafficking. There's also this misconception that it requires transnational movement, but there is also domestic trafficking. In fact, trafficking per se by definition does not even require movement. It can happen within where the person is staying. So, but things are changing last 6-7 years, like from the time when I started working on it and today, there has been a lot of progress in terms of its understanding. There are movies being made on it. There are media reports on trafficking, and there is a lot of global attention to it. So there's more funding coming in for NGOs to work on the issue. Government is paying more attention to it. So things are changing. It's not like it's the same it was years ago. So first, let's look at what are the different kinds of trafficking. What are the laws which address those problems, and then we'll see what are the challenges and what is the government doing about it. So some of you, Anas, must have circulated this report which was prepared on India's trafficking situation, and some of you must have read it. And that was just to give you all a background about the gravity of the problem and the kind of recommendations that are being made for the Indian government to combat this issue. But I'll be covering more than that here today. So India is a source, transit, and destination for trafficking in persons. And it's not always transnational, as I said, there's also domestic trafficking. And so there's of course, there's sex trafficking, which is domestic and transnational. And we also need to understand that the trends of trafficking keep changing. Okay, sex trafficking no longer includes just the brothel kind of issues. Okay, it's gone beyond that now. There are like online platforms where things are advertised. There are little girls who are advertised on these platforms, and there are spas, and there's whole sex tourism which follows this advertisement and things like that. So sex trafficking doesn't always include a brothel system, and that is something we need to acknowledge. A typical sex trafficking case in India, I'll just to give you all an example, is that young girls, most of the times minors, are enticed or deceived, and they are it could be on the pretext of some job opportunity in a bigger city. It could be on a romantic pretext that we'll go there and I'll get married to you and things like that. And once they are brought to a different city, they're often sold into the hands of the traffickers, and from then on it's just impossible for them to get out of it themselves, because their identity is basically stolen completely from them. They're robbed of their identity. They are mostly in a city where they don't understand the language. Their phone is taken away. The documents are forged where the trafficker's name is put as their father's or mother's name. They are beaten up badly. They are physically tortured, and then to help ease the pain, they are given drugs and alcohol. They get hooked onto that, and then it's like a vicious cycle for them to get out of it because they get addicted to all these substances. And then they are slowly, uh, forced into prostitution, and they're made to believe that there's no way out of it. They're brainwashed right from the beginning. They suffer from Stockholm syndrome also. There are a lot of trauma they go through this process. Uh, and so this is a typical sex trafficking story in India, which you will see whenever there are victims rescued. These are set stories which emerge from the victims. When young girls are trafficked, they're often injected with growth hormones so that their bodies mature faster, so that they can be used in the prostitution. So those kind of atrocities also happen. Labor trafficking, again, is something which is a big problem, very prevalent. It's happening within our immediate circles. Sometimes we don't see it, sometimes we see it and ignore it. It's it can be young boys, it can be older men who are trafficked within the country, and a huge problem is in the Middle Eastern countries, where people are promised very lucrative jobs, and their passports are taken away, and they are shipped off to these countries, and they are not even like given jobs which were promised to them. They're very little paying jobs. Their passports are taken away, so they can't really come back. They're made to sign contracts, and the labor laws in those Middle Eastern countries are not in their favor most of the time. So they're not able to, do anything about the exploitative situations. This is a typical labor law, labor trafficking situation. And then as per the definition of trafficking in India, it also includes trafficking of people for removal of their body organs, which is also something which is happening these days. In fact, it happened in my neighborhood, where there were a lot of news reports, not actually news reports, but there was like news circulating in the neighborhood that kids were going missing from the slum areas, and their dead bodies used to be found later on with their kidneys missing and other body parts missing. So these things happen very often around us, but it's just not something we recognize as trafficking. They are sometimes just labeled as a one-off incident, or but it's usually a very well organized racket and a syndicate which is working with very influential people involved in it. Trafficking is an economic crime. There's a lot of money involved in these cases, and it's not something which is like a one-off incident being done by an individual most of the times. We also see a lot of street children begging, and you must have seen babies who look drugged, and there are children who are maimed and forced to beg. Mostly they are trafficking victims as well. So these are the different trafficking examples that are prevalent in our country, at least. The laws which address them are, unfortunately, we don't have like one law which is addressing all forms of human trafficking. There was a law proposed, but it couldn't be passed. First of all, we have Indian Penal Code, Section 370 of Indian Penal Code. And that is something which was amended in 2013. Before that, even the IPC wasn't really addressing this problem in a very holistic manner. So Section 370 is giving a very broad definition, but not broad enough to cover things like forced labor. It's kind of restricted to physical sexual exploitation, and it does mention removal of organs and slavery and similar practices. So forced labor can probably be read into that, but it would have been better if it was actually mentioned specifically as a form of exploitation. So there are three components to trafficking, going by the definition. First is the act. An act can be transportation, it can be recruitment, it can be harboring. There are multiple acts which are mentioned in 370. So as I said, it doesn't always necessarily involve transportation. It can be recruitment within the same city, within the same locality. Means is basically deceit or by force or fraud or coercion, threatening. And the purpose is always exploitation. And as I said, exploitation, the way it's defined, it doesn't really include forced labor in so many words. So these are the three components, but it's important to know that our law specifically also mentions that consent is not something which is relevant when it comes to exploitation. So you can't say that the person consented to coming with me for this specific purpose, because the idea is that you cannot really consent to your own exploitation. And what this sentence actually does is it kind of makes the whole part about fraud, deceit, and threat it makes it irrelevant, because it doesn't matter, because even if the person consented and it appears as the willing went, it doesn't matter, because the point is that you transported them and you exploited them, or you recruited them and exploited them. The means is not really relevant here. So that's a very important part of that section. For forced labor, that's why a lot of times the Bonded Labor Abolition Act is used. But again, the problem with that act is the definition of bonded labor is very restricted. It only, mostly the understanding is it includes where there is a debt, and where these communities, it's common for people to take debts, and then the person who has given the money, they ask these people to work for them until the debt is paid. And it's a very it's just never ending. They keep working for these people for generations and generations without being paid. So, and this is a very prevalent practice in Bihar and Jharkhand and eastern part of the country, but also in other parts of the country. So that is something which needs to be addressed more strongly by our law, which it's not. And as I said, the trends are changing in sex trafficking. The trends are changing in labor trafficking as well. It doesn't always include people being locked up or chained up inside a room while being, being forced to work. They may even have their own mobile phones. That does not mean they're not trafficking victims. And this is something which gets missed out. The police and the judges sometimes focus more on the fact that these people they could have just left if they wanted to. It's not like they were chained, but that is not relevant at all. The law doesn't really acknowledge that as a criteria. And then there is also when there is sex trafficking of children, there's POCSO, which can be invoked, and in actually in labor trafficking cases of certain communities where the victims belong to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, the SC/ST Atrocities Act is also often invoked. So if you look at the challenges, the problem is that it start with the identification of offense. There are very few cases which are identified as trafficking. So it's like if we have so many cases of trafficking, we'll have only these many which are actually identified and registered, and only these many in which there are any convictions. The conviction rate is it's less than 10%. If you look at the NCRB reports, it's appalling how little the conviction rate is. And that is why it's a growing offense, because the risk is very low and it's economically a very profitable thing to do. So more and more people get involved in this offense, because it's even said it's more likely to get struck by lightning than being convicted for a trafficking offense. So it's a very low risk crime. And the reason that we have such low conviction rate is because it's our criminal justice system is not really structured or addressed to is not really structured to address this unique kind of an offense. Um, so the first problem with this offense is that the victims of this offense are very often deeply traumatized, and we don't have a concept of a trauma informed approach in our trials. We don't acknowledge that the victims might not be able to speak out the truth upfront and repeatedly. So trafficking victims require special care, and they, I mean, most of the cases that I have worked on and seen, they won't even speak the truth for the first 2 months. They will just completely, they won't cooperate with any of the proceedings. And the reason for that is mostly, as I said, that they are, throughout their exploitation, they are so heavily brainwashed into and this is I'm talking a lot about sex trafficking here. They are that they're made to believe that there's no way out of this, and that they are dependent on their exploiter for everything. And even if they manage to get rescued for one time, it's they are going to come back to this. So they fear that testifying against their own exploiter is going to make life worse for them when they go back, of course. So they don't feel safe enough to tell the truth, right? And a lot of them do suffer from Stockholm syndrome, so they actually feel that nothing was wrong, and excuse me, and that the exploiter was actually somebody who was looking out for them. So that is one thing, that they take time to open up or feel safe enough to tell the truth. And another thing about trauma-informed approach is that, so it's medically proved that trauma actually physically alters our brain structure. Okay, there are memory gaps within our brain. There are things which victims will not remember immediately, and this gives rise to evolving statements, because what they said in the first instance to the police is going to be very different from what they say later in front of the magistrate or during their testimony. And this happens very often in trafficking case, not because the victim is lying or because the victim is trying to improve on her or his statements, but because their trauma is affecting their ability to remember and speak out things. Okay, and our justice system doesn't really recognize these issues. They are seen as contradictions. They are used by the defense to say, point out weakness in the prosecution case. So maybe what we need here is a strong precedent or a specific law about traumatized victims, that there are going to be evolving statements and they need to be treated differently than our regular offenses and the trials. It has to be acknowledged as an actual problem. Very often the victims who are trafficked are criminalized, and this happens both in sex trafficking and labor trafficking, because when they are trafficked, they are made to do a lot of illegal things, and they really don't have a choice when that happens. But when these things come to light, they are often made accused of certain offenses. Of like a lot of labor trafficking victims in other countries or in India who are trafficked from other countries to here, they might be prosecuted for not having proper work and travel documents or not having a passport. And sex trafficking victims are often accused of like drug abuse and even prostitution under Section 8 of ITPA. Yeah, actually, when I was mentioning all the laws, I forgot to mention the most important one, the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, which addresses the sex trafficking offense in India. And it's criticized a lot because it's still dealing with the offense as an immoral offense, and not really as an exploitation, which which women are subjected to. But it's one of the most comprehensive laws for sex trafficking that we have. So yeah, so of course the victims are criminalized, as I said, and our systems, we do not have a proper witness protection system, and that is a huge issue because ultimately what happens is that these victims don't feel safe enough to testify, and that cannot happen until the system provides them some sort of protection. The accused persons are easily let out on bail. And as I said, even if they're not let out on bail, there's usually a very big racket. So there are other allies of accused who can continue threatening these victims and their family members. Um, and then the biggest problem, of course, for the system is that we do not have prosecutors, investigators, and judges who are trained in this law adequately. So this is something which is, again, it's changing. Trainings are happening now. There are budgets being allocated for training of these stakeholders, but it's still a long way to go. You still come across cases frequently where the investigators are not really, they don't understand there is a law called, there is a section 370 or there is an ITPA. Puts a lot of burden on the NGOs and civil societies who end up doing the groundwork and then contacting the police and then making them aware about the law and the intricacies and how sensitive the case is. So there's a lot of burden on NGOs for these cases. There's not a lot of proactive action taken by the police. The prosecutors, a lot of times, again, don't really understand it, in the sense like they often feel that there is, the person had consented to this whole situation. So they don't really see culpability, especially when the victims are adults. It's not considered a strong case because they feel that the person had gone, willingly, or had, signed a contract even sometimes. So they don't really see that how the consent is not really relevant here. And of course, things would be better if our judiciary is better trained, especially the lower judiciary, to understand these things. There have been a lot of precedents from the Supreme Court even for handling trafficking cases. They don't trickle down to the people who actually have to implement them. They just remain in law reports and academic articles, but they don't really make it to the field, unfortunately. One positive thing which has happened in recent time is creation of anti-human trafficking units, which are specialized investigation units, which consists of trained police officers for investigating and handling trafficking cases. They don't have a lot of budget so far, and less than 20% of the districts of the country have these AHTUs, but the plan is to have one AHTU at least in every district. More in those districts which have more, where the problem of trafficking is more prevalent. So that's something which can make a huge difference if we have specialized units. I feel these specialized units need to be not just for the investigations. There has to be specialized units at all levels of criminal justice system. Just like we have specialized POCSO courts, it's important to have courts for trafficking as well, I feel, where there are judges who are specially trained in this law to hear these cases. And another problem is there's still no specialized shelter homes, government shelter homes for the victims of trafficking, which really hampers the rehabilitation process and even the trials. There are shelter homes, but they are not specifically for trafficking victims who have unique needs. Rescuing victims who are drug addicts, who are alcoholics, is not the same as domestic violence victims who have special needs separately. So it needs to have a more dedicated attention by these shelter homes, which is lacking right now There have been cases of suicides within these shelter homes by the victims. There have been cases where these shelter home wardens have further sold these women back into the hands of trafficking. So it's a very problematic system, and again, this burden still lies on private NGOs to provide rehabilitation to these women and even labor trafficking victims. So that's a big gap. Having government shelter homes is something we need to do. Government has been trying to uh, think of ways, like there was recently a travel ban of women who were less than 30-year-old and more than 50-year-old to Middle Eastern countries, to what is called the ECR countries, the immigration check required countries, which is actually it's a step which is counterproductive, because that kind of pushes things underground, and young women continue to go there for domestic work and other employments, and now they do it illegally and without proper travel documents, which puts them into more difficulties later on. So, and also another important decision by the Supreme Court was in 2013, when in Bachpan Bachao Andolan case, where the court said that any case of missing children where the child is not found within 4 months, the case has to be forwarded to NAHTU, and it has to be treated as a trafficking case, and it has to be investigated accordingly. Also, something which is not very popular. It's not, police doesn't often know this about this judgment, so it doesn't really happen. So there are efforts being made. As I said, things are changing slowly, but we still have a long way to go in terms of taking this crime as seriously as is needed. So this is the crux of what I wanted to tell you all, and maybe now we can start the discussion. Or Anas, are there any comments or questions?
Can I ask something, Tanima?
Yes, please.
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Hi, well done. As expected. Some questions. Firstly, despite knowing this, it has been still even more shocking to know this dunya mein aisi dunya bhi hai, so bad. And but yeah, as you were mentioning about these rehabilitation centers or shelter homes, I was just wondering that while the case is on, while there are hearings on and all, and there are that possibility of threats to them by the extended mafia, that time there should be some special shelter homes for that particular period also, because that is the time when they are most vulnerable and most traumatized mentally, I suppose. Right. And they need very sound counseling. I mean, even more than normal shelter homes. That is a very peak phase in their lives of going either way, to go this way or that way. So there is one suggestion, and I don't know if that is happening or not. Nari Niketan or whichever, a lot of NGOs I think will be coming forward to do that kind of thing. Specialized for that kind of period till there is the decision on the courses and on the cases, and of course the cases should be expedited, of course, for the same reason. That is one. Yeah, first let me just ask you that.
Yeah, you're right. That would be something very ideal, but it does not happen right now. There is a victim protection bill in the parliament, I believe, which is something which would take this into consideration, because while the trial is going on, you're right, that's the exceptional kind of stress they go through. They even have to sometimes encounter the accused face to face in court. So absolutely, that needs to be done. It's not done right now, unfortunately.
Tanima,
yeah,
there is a question from Shashikant. Shashikant, you want to ask that?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I want to ask. Okay, so my question was, you have talked about law and everything. I want to know I want to learn some experience, like what are the hurdles in prosecuting these kinds of offenses, and secondly, what are the investigating machineries? Is there any dedicated investigation team? And if you can do that, please tell us through a personal story in which you have been involved.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there are specialized investigation units called AHTUs, anti-human trafficking units, in some of the districts, not all the districts. I think they're working in about, I think 170 something districts right now. The hurdles in prosecution is also something I covered. Maybe you missed out, is basically things like the victim not being able to tell the truth right away, taking time to come up with the actual version of the story, how trauma affects her statements, which lead to evolving statements, which becomes a problem for the prosecution side because it's something which the defense often uses as a weakness. And of course, there's also a huge language barrier because usually the place from where the victim is rescued is not her hometown or his hometown, and they often struggle to understand the questions. Translators are not always available. Quality of evidence is also a big problem because, as I said, the police is not very often trained, so the quality of evidence is very poor. Like a personal example could be, I can like the one I shared, in fact, where the victims were let off and they were actually sold off by the warden. So the trial was going on, and the victims were in the shelter home. And so what they do, it's very interesting, is when these victims get rescued, and they're usually in sex trafficking cases, there's a raid, and they're like, in a lot of cases, they are like a lot of girls who are rescued together. So along with those 40 or 50 actual victims, the accused had also placed a girl who was, like a mole within their group, who was staying in the shelter home with them. And she was constantly brainwashing these victims while they were there, and constantly telling them that, don't cooperate with the investigation and the trial, and those people are going to come and take you from here eventually, and you are going to go back to that brothel eventually. So actually there were two of them, and both of them made sure that the girls are not up to the task of actually testifying in court. And eventually what happened is that we actually had an order from the Supreme Court of India to make sure that the girls remain in protective custody. And that order was transferred, and like, it was WhatsApp, it was faxed, it was emailed to the warden of the shelter home. But the warden still, released those girls in the hands of traffickers again, and just said that, we didn't receive the order or whatever. That warden was, an FIR was filed, and he was charged, prosecuted, and convicted for this offense. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Shivansh has a question. Shivansh.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
So as per my limited knowledge on trafficking laws, and as you said, that people are often rescued but not rehabilitated. And without effective, timely rehabilitation, we are just making people's situation worse. Right. So what steps do you suggest to strengthen the existing systems which have a institutionalized public justice system response to the problem, and not just something that's knee-jerk?
Yeah, you're right. Not having proper rehabilitation procedures is something which enables re-trafficking in most of the cases. And I think the best solution to that is having more rehabilitation centers, not more, like having rehabilitation centers, which we don't right now, which have a special, like a dedicated program for every individual victim to make sure that she, gets all the medical attention she needs, mental, physical, and is provided with training to, whatever further job opportunities in life. And there are positive examples. It does happen. I have worked with some private NGOs who have been successful in rehabilitating sex trafficking and labor trafficking victims. So it's something which can be done. It just requires political will. It requires funding. It requires attention. But it's definitely a doable thing. It's not impossible.
Tanima, I have to ask you something. So you have a brief experience of working on such subjects in Bangladesh, India, and Uganda. So you have experience of 3 national jurisdictions. Have you seen a difference in the approach towards trafficking in these 3 jurisdictions? And these 3 are, I mean, I think one of the more are the basic hub of trafficking, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thanks for this question. Yeah, definitely. I mean, these all 3 countries, I think I've seen more similarities than differences. The differences I've seen is probably in the efforts being made. But the nature of problem is actually very similar in any country that I have worked in or heard about. Uganda was a place where I worked closely with the government institution. I was working with the public prosecutions department there, and they were working very diligently towards creating a specialized unit within the prosecutions department itself, which is something I would love to see happen in India, because the condition of our prosecution is quite bad here, and it's something which can actually do wonders, because if we have trained prosecutors and something which, you know, they are so key in the entire process that that can do wonders to the entire battle. But coming back to your question, having worked in all these 3 countries, I would like to talk more about the similarities and differences, because something which is striking is that in all the 3 countries there is a lot of trafficking, but a limited knowledge and understanding of the issue, which is just always appalls me, because I don't understand how something can be so prevalent and yet so neglected. It's like an elephant in the room all the time, and it's something which needs to be addressed at a much bigger level, involving resources and political will, which is still lacking. But the good thing is that there are international standards for addressing trafficking, and they are being slowly incorporated in countries' laws and practices. So that is improving in terms of framing of laws, if nothing else, which is always a beginning.
Angela has a question. Angela?
Thank you, sir. Good evening, ma'am. So, ma'am, like you mentioned that there was this rule for travel ban of women aged from 30 to 50 to the ECR countries. But, ma'am, was there any step taken for the protection of foreign nationals who come to India and then get stuck in a vicious cycle of sex trafficking or labor trafficking? So, was there any rule to deal with that?
So there are certain SOPs that India has with some of the other countries like Nepal and Bangladesh, from where there were a lot of victims coming in, and they deal with how the repatriation has to happen between Ministry of Home Affairs and External Affairs of both the countries. So and you will there are actually a lot of cases from Bangladesh where repatriation has happened as per that SOP. So yeah, but it doesn't exist with all the countries. There are only limited countries with which we have these SOPs.
Shravani?
Hi, ma'am. I wanted to ask one question actually. Like we were talking about labor issues, like which is also related to trafficking. So, like in India, I don't have much knowledge, but as per what I have read or studied, like I have seen the major issue which I feel is that, like in the Indian Majority Act, the age of a child is, for instance, 18, and in special cases it's 21. But there are many cases, like there are many other acts in India where the age of the child is 15, considered that person, if that person completes 15 years old, then that person is not considered as a child anymore, and that person can work in factories or other places. So sometimes that also leads to exploitation, and in some cases forced labor, trafficking, because they don't they are not aware about the law, the fact that even if they are 15, like they are not supposed to go and work there.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of exploitation. Because since we have Article 39 clause F, C, D, and those things in our Indian Constitution and all those. So like, don't you think that these are some kind of loopholes, and like if we can try to like improve it or something like that, then maybe that can also help in some
Mhm.
way with the situation, because these things are also triggering the situation of trafficking and forced labor exploitation in some way, even if we are talking about it. Because like as you rightly pointed out that these things are in our academic papers, but these things are not in the field.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Yeah, you're
think
right.
about
I'm glad you brought this up because it's also very common for. So yeah, as per that Child Labor Act, it's forbidden for any child below 16 years of age to work in any industry, but 16 to 18, which is falls under the definition of adolescent, they are allowed to work in certain industries, non-hazardous industries. So and it's also very common for younger children, 12, 13, 14-year-olds to be brought in, and their fake IDs are made in which their age is shown to be 16. Okay, and they are made to work, and they're often brought from their villages by telling their parents that they'll be, admitted to schools, they'll be given education and things like that. But they come here, they are, forced to like live in a tiny room with this one small room in which like there are like 15 boys living together. And a lot of like the big industry here is zari work, that there is a lot of child labor and exploitation of children happening in zari work, and other bag making and like putting buttons on coats and things like that. So it's you're right, like child labor is something which is a big avenue of labor trafficking. Yeah, and it's very prevalent in Delhi itself.
Kritika?
Good evening.
Hi, Kritika.
Hi. So, ma'am, you have a master's degree in international human rights. I wanted to know what contribution would you say it has to the work that you're doing, and would you suggest it to somebody who roughly has the same idea that they want to pursue career-wise?
Okay, so how these master's degrees actually help, in my opinion, or it's actually helped me, is in terms of getting a better perspective of the whole issue of human rights, not just human trafficking. It's just about getting a better perspective on things and how laws ought to work but don't. How you can contribute as a lawyer, or as an activist, or an academician. And another big thing which happens through these master's program is that you interact with a lot of people who are working in similar fields in different parts of the world. And it's inspiring, and secondly, there's a lot of exchange of and experiences which help you see your own country's when you explain your own country's problems to someone else, it helps you see it in a very different way. You start understanding it better, you start looking at things more in depth because you want to explain it better. Okay, so that interaction with people working in similar fields from the rest of the world is something which is I think the most important thing. And academically, it helps you strengthen your understanding is about, and it improves your understanding of what you're trying to do here as a human rights lawyer. So I would definitely recommend it to someone who wants that in their career. Yeah.
Kashish?
Yes, thank you, sir. So, ma'am, my question is, you probably know about it. You probably can give us a good insight about it. So we know that the ISIS, while they were pretty much committing genocide, they trafficked just an obscene number of Yazidi women. And a lot of these women, while they're being integrated in different countries, whether it's Germany or France, they haven't gotten justice for whatever sexual slavery and whatever crimes were committed on them. So what do you think on an international level is a good response, whether it's through a hybrid tribunal or a truth commission? And what do you think is a good prosecution model on a transnational or international level?
So personally, I am a big believer in, I believe in domestic instruments and frameworks. I find them to be the most effective. And even though like most of these cases are transnational in nature, I feel that it's difficult for countries to submit to jurisdiction which are not national, because they always would try to protect nationals of their own country, and then it becomes about sovereignty more than the actual issue. So I think it's more effective for these kind of cases to be tried at the domestic level itself. It can be the jurisdiction of these cases is because it's a continuing crime. It starts from where the person was trafficked, through the place he or she was trafficked, and the destination. So there's a huge, a lot of options where you want to prosecute. It's always easier to prosecute at the destination because a lot of evidence and witnesses are found at the destination point. But it's actually possible for them to be prosecuted anywhere. So I feel the global response has to be to strengthen the domestic frameworks to address this problem. And because it's a transnational crime, there have to be SOPs in place to ensure that there can be video conferences for witnesses who are outside the country. There has to be a collaboration between investigation teams of different countries. That is something which we still lack, for evidence collected in this country to be shared with the investigations or a trial being held in another country. And for this also, we need better bilateral agreements with different countries, which can make it, which is totally workable, I feel.
Areeb.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Areeb.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I have two questions. First is, what do you think if prostitution is legalized in India, would it affect the human trafficking thing? And second is, recently I wrote an article relating to child labor in the state of Uttar Pradesh, city Aligarh. So most of the children were working because firstly, their family was very poor. Secondly, they didn't have any registers maintained by the local dhabas and the establishments. So do you think that these some provisions are also there under the Prohibition of Child Labor Act? Section 17 confers some duties on these local inspectors. So what's your opinion on these? Will the regulation of these provisions can change? Because local inspectors, police, in most of the cases, they already knew what all is going on around the area. And most of the cases, they knew that children are working in these establishments. So can these regulations, if they are implemented, they can change scenario now?
Okay. So your first question regarding legalization of prostitution, there's no easy answer to that. It's a very debated topic, of course. Personally, I feel that considering the fact that so much of prostitution industry is fueled by trafficking victims, I feel legalizing it, even though legalizing it has certain, a lot of points in its favor. If you look at the trafficking victims, I feel it would increase the number of trafficking victims there, because the demand is much more for these, for sex workers, but the supply of voluntary workers is way less. So to meet that demand, as I said, it's an economic crime. To meet that demand, it's going to be fueled by trafficking itself. So if you look at it from the perspective of trafficking, it's a problem. Okay, so that's what I can give you right now in this short time. Regarding the children working at dhabas and the requirement for the police officers to take proactive measures, you're absolutely right. And these children are definitely in need of help and protection. But it's also not as simple as that. It's a very social economic problem in a country like ours, where parents cannot afford to send their children to school, and in a lot of these cases, because of a lack of a proper rehabilitation system in place, these children are rescued and then they are just maybe pushed into something which is even more exploitative. Okay, so addressing these issues without having a proper solution in mind is also a problem. It shouldn't be just there are a lot of NGOs which have these monthly targets of doing so many rescues. So they are rescued. They are from these dhabas and tire puncture shops. They'll be rescued. They'll be kept in. They'll be taken to the CWC and everything, sent back home, and then like 2 weeks after that, you will find them working in maybe an even worse situation. So unless we have proper solutions to what we're going to do with these children when we rescue them, so-called rescue them, it's not going to solve the problem. Okay, so we need to have better systems in place for rehabilitation and the aftercare part of it, which is still lacking mostly. So there are a lot of NGOs which do have proper aftercare programs, which make sure that the kids are enrolled in school and there's a proper follow-up done for the next 2 years to ensure that the children are now going to school and they're being taken care of properly. But again, as I said, it's something which just is a burden on NGOs, and it's not something which is done as part of the system itself.
Okay, Varad has a question that I'll be reading out for him. Hi, from a policy perspective, how successful has the implementation of the 2018 Act and ensuing National Trafficking Bureau been in curbing instances of trafficking? Do you think a standalone National Bureau has helped in a time where judicial priorities are misplaced?
So that act was never passed, unfortunately, the Anti-Trafficking Act. It was it couldn't be passed through both houses of the parliament. So it did promise a lot of things, and it wasn't a perfect law, but it was still better than what we have right now. There were a lot of criticisms of that act as well, but we'll have to wait for it to come up in the parliament again.
Okay, Kashish has another question.
Okay.
Let me know.
Thank you.
Kashish, you're muted. Can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. Thank you for your answer. That was a really comprehensive answer. And while you were talking about the economics of prostitution, there have been multiple studies which have shown that even the porn industry, like around the majority of the women that are employed, are victims of trafficking. So I have no idea whether there has been a legislative response on a national or an international media on an international level regarding the porn industry and what the norms are regarding victims of trafficking. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, international level, it is being recognized. So you will see that the definition of exploitation when you talk about trafficking does include child pornography in a lot of domestic. In India, we still haven't included that in our actually explicitly included in our trafficking definition or the exploitation bit, but it can be read into it very easily. Child pornography is a crime, and but connecting it to trafficking is something which would need an extra effort by the prosecutors and the investigators. So that can be made easier if the definition of exploitation under the trafficking provision includes child pornography.
Okay, I have one question. There is this law reform commission that has been set about in NLU Delhi. There are problems with its composition and everything, and we understand that. But if you had to recommend something the trafficking issue, do you have anything in mind? I mean, what law can be reformed? What amendments can be brought in order, or if the 2018 Act will suffice?
Yeah, I mean, if there has to be a new law, then even the 2018 Act needs to be re-looked into. There were a lot of problems with that Act as well. So we definitely do need a comprehensive law which looks at trafficking after and rehabilitation of victims. It does to have a financial component because you this problem allocating enough funds to it. And obviously strengthening the existing anti-human trafficking units and creating more rehabilitation centers for the victims, and making the definition better and more inclusive of different crimes. And another criticism of the 2018 Act was that it was taking away the agency of women in certain ways, because even the existing Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, if you look at the section 17 of that act, it gives the power to the magistrate to keep even adult victims into protective custody. So even if, so it kind of, it does take away the agency of women, and it infantilizes these women. Like for children, protective custody, and that decision being taken by CWC is one thing. But decision being taken for adults is a problematic thing, and it's in place because we lack a witness protection system, and these victims are vulnerable. So, but the solution to that was not to take away their agency to go back home or go wherever they want. So this is something which was not being addressed properly even in the 2018 Act. So we need a anti-trafficking law which respects agency of these victims, while also giving them a strong protection from their abusers, and giving them safety and security to be able to testify.
One last question from Shravani.
Hi, ma'am. I have another question actually. Ma'am, like that time you were talking about like trafficking in Bangladesh. So since recently, like there's a discussion around the state of refugees. So, ma'am, I have actually read somewhere. I don't remember, but I have read it that that in the camps of Bangladesh, where the Rohingya refugees they live, there is a rampant problem of trafficking. There are girls, like mostly 13, 14 or young girls, they are like taken away from their mothers on the promise of being given job or such things like that. So, ma'am, like mostly the problem they face is the country they come from. It is a very dangerous situation for them to go back there, and the country they are in, like suppose in Bangladesh, that country is not ready to accept them. They are kept in a basically in a camp. So, ma'am, what are the challenges at that time, like they face while getting justice? In any case, if they approach the authority, like I want my daughter back or I want my sister back. So, what are the challenges those girls they face mainly, or those families face mainly? Because is there any comprehensive like international act on such thing, or how they're like?
Yeah.
What are the procedure basically?
Right. Yeah, you're right. Refugees are a very vulnerable group for trafficking. And this is something which is a worldwide problem. Refugee population is considered one of the most vulnerable trafficking victims because one, they often do not have travel documents, and they are easily deceived into, being. They tell them traffickers or them that they'll get this job for them, which would like give them a citizenship or proper documents and things like that. So, and a lot of times there are a lot of language barriers for refugees in different parts of the countries. So they do constitute a very vulnerable group that ways. And structurally also they face a lot of problems in access to justice because one, they're already going through a range of human rights violations, and this becomes like an additional burden on them, to like another battle to fight. So and it's almost impossible for them to access the justice system in these cases. There, and that's when I say that India needs a more comprehensive law. It does need to take into account this population which would not have otherwise access to the laws or the institutions. Currently, nationally we don't have anything specific for this population that I know of. Internationally, of course, like there are promises made, but it's hard to really imagine them being able to access them. Like there are international conventions which which protect human rights of the refugees, and like they exist, but for countries to actually have frameworks in place to implement those provisions is something we need to look at. Because if there are refugees in India and India is a signatory to a particular convention but doesn't really have any local law to implement it, what use is it? So
Okay, I was sorry. There are two more questions if you have time.
yeah,
You're
sure.
covered with it. So Angela has another question.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, I have two questions. Firstly, with regards to sex trafficking, the definition of sex trafficking is often more concentrated about victims who are basically women. So what happens is sex trafficking of men, that especially minors, young boys, or even transgender individuals, that often gets sidelined. So how do we make this definition of victims more inclusive? Ma'am, first, if you answer this, then I'll go to the next.
Yeah, so Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act is not gender neutral. It's talking about women specifically. Section 370, however, is gender neutral. So that is something which can be applied to any person who's sexually exploited. So we have the law in place, but if it's actually used or not is something, it's a different matter.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, and my last question will be, ma'am, often when these victims of sex trafficking, especially minor girls or women, are rescued, what happens is the families do not want to accept them back in the family. They often even consider marrying them off to the person who trafficked them in the first instance itself. So what can we do about that? Can we put in place some awareness programs for the families of such victims?
Yes, community counseling is something which is very important, not just of the family, but the entire community, you know, the neighbors, the extended family. It's important because if we are talking about rehabilitation of victims, it's not about her as an individual. It's about her being able to go back to her family and her society as well. So it needs to be incorporated in the rehabilitation programs and it's done, like a lot of NGOs who work with these victims do home visits for the victims. The families are counseled, even the neighbors are counseled. It's verified that, you know, the community is willing to accept the victim back into the family, and if it's not found favorable, they are they continue living in the rehabilitation facility until they find their own feet. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's something which needs to be incorporated into the rehabilitation program.
Okay, this is definitely the last question. Zia wants to ask, are there many instances where the ruling government is complicit in sexual abuse, trafficking networks, example, Muzaffarpur shelter case?
Yeah, Muzaffarpur shelter case is something which brought to light some very, very disturbing things, because it was found out that a lot of shelter homes for children, childcare institutions which are meant to protect women, children, and other vulnerable groups are actually further exploiting them, even indulging into trafficking and various forms of exploitation. I won't say the present government, because it's not something new. It's been continuing for, you know, even before this government came into power. And honestly, as I said, it's a very organized crime. It's a syndicate. It cannot be done without influential people being involved. So it's unfair to blame one specific government for it. It's been happening for decades and decades. So it's something which is which just exists, and government after government just continue to ignore it. So more than looking at which government was complicit, I would like to focus on which government is actually taking steps to combat it. Which government has actually taken steps to actually address the problem or allocate more funds to address the problem. That's something which needs to be looked at.
Okay. So Tanima, thank you. This was perhaps one of the most interactive session that we had, and we're really thankful to you. Thank you
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for taking
and
out
we
time.
learned a lot. We really learned a lot. This is a subject that, it's barely discussed, and even if it's discussed in academic circle more than between us practitioners. So perhaps this may be a beginning of something.
Yeah, and I would just like to add at the end that a lot of work is being done for anti-trafficking at the prevention level, at the aftercare level, but we need so many more litigating lawyers and practitioners who are familiar with this law and want to work in this field. So it's not something which is taught in our law schools. So it's just something which we don't know about, but it's important for more and more practitioners to get engaged in these cases. So yeah, that's what I want to end this on. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.